So this month's accent block is one of my favorites. I just adore it. It's just the cutest little thing. It is versatile. It's a lot of fun. It brings a little whimsical feel to the quilt. And I just love it. So what you'll need are some half square triangles. So we're going to make 8 of those total. Some squares from our background fabric and some squares from the red number 2 fabric. We'll need a square of the gray number 1 and then rectangles for the little sash type sections that join each of these quadrants together to make the block complete. And I've already starched and cut these strips, so let's go over the sizes that you'll need to cut. I went ahead and prepped all of the fabrics that I'm going to need to make both of the Simple Sue blocks for the month. Now the instructions are specific for using scarlet number 2. And then using orange number 2 from the Fireflower block month is listed with the additional months that the block will be made for. There are not separate instructions for making it with orange number 2, but the instructions are exactly the same. You just substitute orange number 2 for scarlet number 2. So easy peasy. I've already starched my snow background, the scarlet number 2, the orange number 2, and cut the strips that I need for making both of the blocks. The instructions tell you to cut for 1 block. They'll give you the quantities that you'll need for cutting for just 1 block. But since I'm cutting for 2, I am using that cutting guide, the cutting diagram. I'm using the cutting diagram that is listed at the very beginning of the pattern, so you can just visually see how many strips of each thing you'll need for making 2 blocks. And what I am going to actually need here is a couple of different measurements of snow. So for snow, I am going to need a 1.5 inch strip for cutting those sashing rectangles. You're going to need, now you'll need 2 of these for making 2 blocks, and then a 1 3/4 inch strip, and that is for cutting the little squares. And you'll need a larger 2-inch strip, and that is for making the half square triangle units. And we'll cut that up with our Fons Porter ruler. Now for scarlet number 2, I cut 2 different strip widths. You're going to need one that is 1 3/4 inch, and you'll need one, this is for the little squares that you'll need in the block, and you'll need one that's 2 inches, and that is for the half square triangles. And finally, the same thing for orange number 2. You'll need the 1 3/4 inch, that is for the little squares, and then the 2 inch here, then the 2 inch is for the half square triangle units. Finally, you're going to need the gray number 1, and you'll need just one square that is 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch for each of your blocks. So if you're getting the bundle, this little square will actually give you enough for all 4 blocks, and then you'll have your gray number 1 in that bundle for that block for month number 6. But I wanted you to have this now, and I felt that it would be better to do it now than wait till later. Alright, so let's cut up these strips and get making our Simple Sue block. We're going to start with cutting the 1.5 inch strip. This little strip gets subcut into 4 rectangles for each of the Simple Sue blocks. If you want to make a bunch of these, you can cut several strips and get your rectangles for your additional blocks as well. So I'm just going to true up one end here and flip it on around, and then just start cutting my 1.5 by 3 inch strips. It's a little bit of an odd measurement, but it's the scale the scale of the strip or of that rectangle is what kind of gives the block a different look, rather than everything being all 2-inch or 3-inch measurement units. So we'll need 4 for a single block. Now I'm just going to go ahead and cut up this whole strip, and then I have a few other ones cut up, and then I'll have enough for making both blocks. So again, 4 for each block, 1.5 by 3 inches, and then I have a little waist at the end. Okay, so I'll put those aside in their own little stack. And then go ahead and next I'm going to make the squares. This is the 1 3/4 inch strip. I'm going to go ahead and fold it in half and true up both of these ends at the same time. And then I can cut 2 at a time. And you could cut the strip in half and do it this way, but that way if I do have extra here in the center, maybe I'll be able to get a square out of it. We'll see. You only need 4 per block, so for the 2 blocks that, you could see that. So for the 2 blocks, the orange number 2 and scarlet number 2, we only need 8. So 1 3/4. Now this is, again, another little bit of an odd measurement. So I am aligning it at 1 3/4 by 1 3/4. We don't use 3/4 inch measurements in a lot of quilting, but it is a really good skill, or it's really good to try out piecing those types of measurements, and helps with those quilting math skills too. Quilt math. Sometimes I feel like my son should learn quilt math in his middle school math class, because there's so many real world applications for it. All right, so just realigning as I go. That way, if that little strip here shifts off a little bit, I can just realign those edges. And then now I have 8. And look, I actually, ooh, that's a little, I don't think I'd probably get 1 out of that if I needed to, but I already have all 8 cut, so I'll just leave that aside. Keep those together. Now, for the Fons Porter ruler, we haven't used this on video in a little while. So this is for half square triangles. So I'm right-handed. I like to start over on the left-hand end of the strip. This is a 2-inch strip. Now, we are actually making 1 3/4 inch unfinished, which will finish. Okay, so stick with me. This is some brain work quilt math here. So let's look at the little sample here. So this half square triangle measures, let's put the ruler on it so you can see, measures 1 1/4 finished. When this seam up here is sewn, it will be 1 1/4 all the way around. So to get the unfinished measurement, you'd add a 1/2 inch for your seam allowances. So let's go back to our lesson on the Fons Porter ruler. We look at the number in the yellow circle. That tells us the finished size of our half square triangle. And then we slide it on over, and the number in black, that's the strip width that we need to cut. But you can see there's no 1 1/4 inch half square triangle. So bump it up. It's better to make it bigger than too small. We'll bump it up to 1 1/2, and we'll cut 2-inch strips, and then we'll just trim it to size. Again, it is so much easier to trim fabric than wished we had more. Try and weave it back on, or sew it, or glue it. So we'll just start with it big, and then we'll trim it down a little bit. So again, we look at the circle in yellow. That tells you the finished size after all the seams have been sewn. Slide it over, and that tells you your strip width to cut. So that's why we cut a 2-inch strip, because we're making it bigger so we can trim it down to size. So, and that will be making the little units for making these little guys here. Now there is an alternative, there's lots of alternative ways to make half square triangles. In the Limelight instructions on page 6, I believe there's an additional method, but you can use your favorite method for making the half square triangles as well. So align your ruler, the Fons Porter ruler, right on that 2-inch measurement. The little yellow triangle will peek out, and then we'll cut both edges. I'm going to have to reach around to get this other side, and then that's one. And then I'll flip the ruler. So remember, the ruler was this way first, and then I'm going to just turn it, give it a 180-degree turn, align that top at that 2-inch measurement, make sure no fabric sticking out over here, and then cut there. And then I'll just keep on going until I have as many as I need for my quilt block. And you'll need 8 of these total for your simple Sue block, or 16 for making both of them. So we'll repeat this, basically these same exact cuts for the most part, with our scarlet number 2. So with scarlet number 2 and orange number 2, you could even stack them and cut them together. Now when you're cutting like this, I don't like to go more than 2 or 3 layers deep. I can never trust that it won't shift too much. So maybe 2, 3, 4 layers. Any more than that, you're going to risk it being inaccurate. So with the 2-inch strip, that's this strip here, that is your half square triangles again, and you'll need 8 total. So same exact thing we just did. I'm going to stack both together, cut on that. Let's scooch this over. So the same exact thing that we just did, align your ruler on that the 2-inch line on the edge of your fabric, cut your diagonal, do a little reach around and cut very carefully, cut that outside edge, and then you can put that aside. Realign your fabric if you need to. Turn your ruler upside down. Line it at the 2 inches. And you'll keep doing that all down the strip until you get 8 of each for the block. And then that last measurement, 1 3/4, remember that is for the squares. So again, this is a super easy one to stack because we're just cutting squares, nothing too fancy. True up one end, and you'll need 4 of each for each block. Flip it on around. Now if you're left-handed, you'll do the opposite. You could true up the left-hand side and then flip it around to start cutting the other direction. So again, line it up at that 1 3/4 inch and cut. I like to push it out of the way. That's just my preference. And just keep going down your strip until you get 4 of each for your simple Sue block. So next we'll start assembling our units and getting our block put together. Everything's cut and ready to start assembling for our simple Sue block. We have our half square triangle units, the little tiny gray square that goes right in the middle, our 1 3/4 inch squares, and our 1.5 by 3 inch rectangles. So these will all come together to make our simple Sue block. And I do have enough cut to make 2, so I'll walk you through the assembly of 1, and I will probably, like on my own, also work on the second one, because once everything is prepped, it's almost like it doesn't take too much more time to make 2 as it does to make 1 when you're working in an assembly line style. So I do recommend, if you are willing, to try making both at the same time. If you haven't done much piecing with small pieces before, do try just the 1 at a time. That way, as you're learning something new, you don't have to worry about keeping track of 2 blocks at the same time. So I'm going to scooch these orange guys right over, and I'm going to start assembling the half square triangles first. Right. To assemble the half square triangles, we're going to need the half square triangle units and our washable Elmer school glue. So I'm going to kind of assembly line style put these together. So I'm just going to set these all out. And then you can follow along as I kind of do. This is kind of my method, or really not kind of, it is my method when I'm working on my own and not doing a video. I like getting things done on assembly line. Blame my childhood youth spent in a dressmaking factory, and I like to be able to do as many of the same things at one time as I can. So I'm glue basting all of these at one time. The glue isn't going to dry before I get back to the beginning, but I am going to start at the beginning and then align. I like to align it this way. It's just a preference. Make sure those corners align up there and your raw edge there. And flip those over so they're in the right orientation. And I'll just get these all put on. Again, get the outside corner and your diagonal line matched up as best you can. Well, don't worry if I went out of order from my original gluing order. They still won't dry by the time I get there. Alright, so that's all 8, and now I can heat set all of them at the same time. And then they're all ready to sew. So when I sew these guys, again, we cut them big because there wasn't that measurement on the ruler for cutting a strip for a 1 1/4 inch half square triangle, the finished size. So we have some wiggle room here. I do sew these with a scant 1/4 inch, so that's what I will do at my machine from end to end, no stopping or starting, or sorry, no stopping, just from one end to the other. I'm going to sew with a scant 1/4 inch. Thread color is completely up to you. Because of this darker scarlet, I'll probably use this color here. It's 2779. Well, you can color match or use a neutral. It's completely up to you. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these, and then we will get them trimmed up and ready to assemble into our block. The half square triangles are all sewn and ready to press and trim. Well, for pressing, I am going to flip those over, set the seam. It's always a good idea to set that diagonal seam. It prevents those little pesky ripples that can happen. And then I am pressing toward the red, toward the scarlet color. So again, just set it, and then take that red side and pull it on over. And I'll do that for all 8 of them. And last one. All right, now these are all ready to trim to 1 3/4 inch by 1 3/4 inches. So using the block lock ruler is my favorite way to trim half square triangles. If you haven't tried it yet, I highly recommend it. I'm using the 4.5 inch by 4.5 inch half square triangle ruler. I do have these available in my shop, and I like this size because I can do small half square triangles and large up to 4.5 inches. So it's really versatile. And when I am trimming with it, it has this little groove. Can you see that? Let's get a good angle. It has a little groove right here. And that groove locks right in to the side press seam of your half square triangle. And it can really only go one way, because if you do it like that, flip it around and lock it in, you can see that it's off. The point of the ruler isn't aligning with the point of your half square triangle. So you just flip it around. Because this is going to be 1 3/4 inches, I want the outside edge of my half square triangle to either align right at 1 3/4 inches or just a bit big so I can trim it off. Having it just go beyond that measurement helps a lot to make it accurate rather than trying to fuss with it to be perfect. It's easier to trim it than wish I had more fabric. So lock that in. And then I trim the side, and if your ruler moves at all, just readjust it, and then I trim the top, and then flip it around. Look, it's so cute and little, I love it. And then flip the ruler around also, and then realign that trued up corner at 1 3/4 inches. So there's a little marked line there for you. And then I'll trim both of those. And I'll do the same for all 8 of my half square triangles. So I'll do one more for you. So my ruler was already reversed, so I'm going to start with the red up. I have to turn the ruler around to start the way I started before with the white up. So let's start that way, just to be consistent for you. So trim both sides. Give some pressure on the ruler when you are holding it in place. And if you have one of those rotating mats, they are really nice to use with this ruler. Okay, edit that out. Note self. I just went off a little bit and just need to trim that top. Okay. So I'll go ahead and trim all 8 of my half square triangles, and then we'll start assembling them into our simple Sue block.